Hey everybody, Pastor Vern with your daily update for June 26, 2020, the end of another week. It's Friday, end of another work week anyway. And as we look into continuing our series, remind you that we're planning to have worship in Belgrade and Fullerton outdoors this week. And then hopefully on the 5th of July, we'll be back in the churches and have revised worship compared to what we were doing, but still we'll be able a chance to rejoice together in the worship of our God. As we are moving along here, we're looking at some of the women in the Bible. This is a little bigger task than I thought it was going to be when I started this project, to sort through all the different names. One of the things I'm finding is that just like for most of us, a lot of the names were very common names for people, for women. And there's lots of references to the same name. We know that in Mary for sure. Miriam, which is another form of Mary. There are several of those. There are several other ones, and that are repeated, and we have to be a little careful about which one we're talking about, because even though they may have the same name, they may have a very drastically different role in the story of God's people. Today we're going to talk about Lydia. Lydia was a pretty popular name at that time period, but it was a Greek name, so it wasn't used so much in the Jewish heritage of people. And the Lydia we're talking about today, we're not really certain if she was born into a Jewish family. It would appear maybe not, with using the Greek name, even though other Jews did adopt those names through time periods. But it would appear that she was maybe a convert to Judaism, and then she became a very devout woman who spent some of her time seeking deeper spiritual relationship with God. In fact, that was an important part of who she was before she became a Christian, before she had encountered Paul in his missionary movements throughout the world. One thing that's a little different about Lydia that we don't necessarily put into the character of women of that time period. She was a businesswoman, a very good one, and she was able to actually do a lot to help support Christ, or Christ's church once it got going, and to do some of the work that Christ had called her to do. She was they said a seller of purple. Now sometimes it says a seller of purple cloth, but the process for purple dye was that they had to collect a huge amount of a certain type of sea creature, a clam type creature, and they would have to collect an awful lot of them to make this purple dye. And that was part of her process, and that's one of the reasons that purple was a royal color, because the dyes were not easily come by. But that was her business, and she was very good at it. She was one that was not to be going to be taken advantage of in her business life, which, like we said, also gave her the opportunity also to do a lot of the work that Christ had called all of us to do, to help watch out for others. She was a person who transformed lives because of her willingness to take in and be hospitable to those who were seeking, those who were out spreading the good news. She housed some of the apostles from time to time in her home and gave them the hospitality of a nice home where they could work out of. Paul enjoyed that hospitality during his time out doing the work of Christ, and that's when she became converted to being a Christian, is there in her conversations with Paul. She would, some would say that as she moved along in her life, her senior partner became Christ. That was the one who she had dedicated her life to. That the work that she did, a lot of it was done in a way that would glorify God. She became very strong in her spiritual awakening. That she had understood the grace that God had offered her, and that she had accepted it willingly, and that there was nothing that she wouldn't do that would enhance the God's relationship with the people in the world. So she's one of them great examples of someone who is not fits into the stereotype of maybe what we see in the scriptures, that she was a businesswoman, a very successful one, had a fine home. That was her scenario, not that of her husband's necessarily, and that she had come through the process of maybe becoming Jewish, finding a relationship with the God of the Hebrews, and then finding a relationship with Christ through Paul's evangelism, which brought her to the place of being a Christian and carrying on that tradition. All right, well, let's move along to the weekend. Y'all have a good weekend. Watch out for yourselves. Do what you can for others. Stay safe, and we will see you on Monday.